Hello, my name is Ramunda Young, and I am owner and co founder of Mahogany Books, along with my husband Derek and our teenager Mahogany. On behalf of Mahogany Books and DC Public Library, I'd like to wish you a happy Women's History Month and welcome you to our special event with Laura Coates for her new book, Just Pursuit: A Black Prosecutor's Fight for Fairness. A special shout out and huge thanks goes out to the DC Public Library Foundation for supporting this event. In addition to being a CNN senior legal analyst and Sirius XM radio host, Laura Coates is a former federal prosecutor and served as Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Columbia and a trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, specializing in the enforcement of voting rights throughout the United States. She has also worked as a civil rights attorney and an intellectual property litigator with an expertise in First Amendment and media law. We are very excited to have Laura discuss her Just Pursuit book. Joining us tonight to lead the discussion is Laura's CNN colleague, Abby Phillip. Abby is CNN's senior political correspondent and anchor of Inside Politics Sunday. She joined the network in 2017 and served as White House correspondent through 2019. Abby joined CNN from the Washington Post, where she served as a national political reporter covering the White House. Before joining the Washington Post, Abby was a digital reporter for politics at ABC News. Abby, thank you for joining us tonight. And to each of you watching from all across the nation, thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. It is so good to be here with you.
It is too. I get to see you in person.
I know.
I love it.
And for those of you watching at home, Laura and I are not the same person. We get mistaken for each other all the time, which is the best compliment.
It's a compliment to me. Thank you very much.
I have known you since I've been at CNN, and I still, to this day, every time you are on television, I turn up the volume to hear what you have to say, because you're always prepared. You always explain things in an incredibly succinct way, and you have the context. And I think actually that is a lot of what this book is about. It's all of the not all, many of the experiences that brought you to where you are, and it's riveting. This book is about your time as a prosecutor, and it's the most complicated role to be in as a Black woman in this country. Tell us a little bit more about why you wanted to go there, why you were willing to put yourself in that position at that point in your career.
Well, first, how excited am I to be on the receiving end of Abby Phillips and her questions. Thank you for being here. It's so sweet. And I so look up to you and admire your career, girl. I really,
you
really
look up
do.
To, I look up
I
to
do,
you.
I do, but I'm also 5'3", so maybe, maybe it's right, but I really do look up to you. I gotta tell you, this book was so deeply personal. I mean, you asked why I went there, literally, but the idea of even going there to write this book was something that was very scary for me. I mean, I talk about on CNN what the law is and how to interpret it, but rarely how I feel about the law. And this really delves very deep into that for a very big reason. And that's because I think when I first chose to go to the Department of Justice, I initially began in the Civil Rights Division, which to me is always considered the crown jewel of our Justice Department. It's the one that I think I revered so much, thinking to myself, could it be possible that I would be among some of the most iconic legal architects and minds who have thought through the not just civil rights era, as they say, which is not finite, but this movement. And so when I began in the voting section, I was really drawn because I had always had a sincere interest in restoring rights for former felons, voting rights in particular. I wrote my senior thesis in college on it. You can imagine how well that went over in the Bush GOJ when I was interviewing. But I was always very clear about that aspect of civil rights advocacy. So when I first went, it was in many ways a foregone conclusion that this is where a civil rights proponent and advocate would go. Yeah. When I went to be a criminal prosecutor under that same Department of Justice, Abby, it was such a paradigm shift. It was that question, the tension that you speak about, the importance of the job, but the weight of the job, and what it was like to have so many battles of allegiance. As I tried to process, here I was, the lived experience of a Black woman, a civil rights proponent, and now I'm standing where people believe the stereotypical man or white man ought to be. And I was often viewed as a betrayal for the same people that I'd once advocated for and was a foregone conclusion I would advocate for again in the Civil Rights Division.
Yeah, that tension of being viewed by defendants, many of them who were Black or brown, as being part of the problem. You would not be the first Black prosecutor to deal with that. Did you ever get to a point where you said, "Not me. I can't do this anymore. I have to get out"?
Absolutely. And those days, frankly, came sooner. There were many straws that were floating on this particular camel's back. The one that landed for me came at a time that was very personal. I had given birth to my children. They were stair-step babies. And it was a time when Trayvon Martin had been killed. It was a time when you had Mike Brown, you had Tamir Rice, you had Sandy Hook happening. You had a whole confluence of events where people were calling on and looking towards prosecutors to figure out how to make sense of violence in America, how to hold people accountable. And my husband would often ask questions, particularly for the police involved encounters. And he would ask about, why hasn't there been this charging decision? Or why haven't they done this? Or is it really that hard to do? And I would give him answers that I knew were in line with how the law should be interpreted and how it acted and operated. But he was rarely satisfied by those responses because, as I came to realize, he was grappling with this sense, this foreboding sense of an inevitability about what might happen in his own life. And one day, he calls me into the garage, and there was yet another package of yet another gadget that my husband had bought, which I'm sure during the pandemic we can all relate to how many things are coming to our home. And I sort of, tongue-in-cheekingly said, "What is this now? You don't need this. What did you buy this time? You don't need this." And my beautiful Black husband looked at me with tears in his eyes. And he said, "It's not for me, it's for you." And he pointed to a dashboard camera, and he'd installed it on our vehicles. And he said, "If I'm ever pulled over by police officers, I want you to know what really happened." And here I am, a part of this system of justice, a prosecutor who has the power to wield and exercise discretion, and I can't console and comfort the love of my life from feeling this inevitability that his own demise might be at the hands of officers that I may call to the stand, that I know the script they'll use. So for me, when that hit, that began that moment of total introspection of, am I complicit in this system? Am I the exception or am I the rule? And if my husband is beginning to question, what does that say about the role I will play?
Yeah. What was your answer to that question? Did you feel complicit?
At times, I question. I knew that I had power. I knew that I had autonomy and that there were rarely checks and balances on the power that I could wield. But there were moments, just because we are so fungible, that even if I did not feel like I was individually complicit in a system, I was so fungible, Abby, to the point where we were rarely called by our names. We were called government in a courtroom. To the point
you
where
could take Laura Coates out of the room and someone else would
be there. To the point where I remember being, talking to a judge one day, and I said, "I'm sorry, we're setting a status conference." So I'm not available. This is my due date, Your Honor. I can't do it that day. And she made this huge issue. Really? The federal government is pregnant? Well, who's the father, government? The whole government's unavailable. And I was like, okay, I see you. I get it. Thank you very much. I guess the government can be available this day. And so thinking about just that, the way we're fungible, if I wasn't present, if I wasn't unapologetically bringing my entire self, then who might be there? But there were times it was overwhelming. And I write about in the book, in particular, the intersection of immigration policy, for example, and what it's like to make choices when a victim had an active deportation warrant, a victim of a crime. And I was required by my office to report him.
I have to say, that is one of the most haunting stories that you have in this book. It was hard for me to even read it. I felt completely arrested by the story as I was reading it. And I cannot imagine you experiencing that and realizing there was nothing that you could do. And I think for people at home reading that, they might come to the conclusion, this system is irredeemable, if there's no recourse in a situation like that, for those of you who haven't read the book, although we hope that you will, as Laura just said, there's a victim who had a warrant out for them, and you had to report them to the authorities. Some people might think about that and they might say, is this really a justice system? What's your answer to them?
We yet to have a justice system. We have a legal system that's aspiring to be a justice system, much like we have an aspirational democracy in some respects. We have an aspirational America, hoping to be what we are on paper. And much is true about this nation of laws that we live in. And, when you describe the absence of alternatives and the thought that it's possibly irredeemable, that's exactly where I want people to go. I mean, I bring people along on this vicarious journey, not to self-aggrandize. I'm not expecting, nor am I a heroine or champion of in instances. But what I want people to say is, hold on. Here is the nation. Here are the laws. Here are the absence of alternatives. Am I comfortable that our legal system does not provide for fairness to be a higher priority than the pursuit of a conviction? Because the pursuit of justice actually can create injustice, like we talked about.
Yeah.
The binary approach to, hey, justice is defined by a verdict, a guilty verdict, and otherwise it's been eluded, it's been elusive in one way. If you ask yourself, when reading the book, God, what else could you have done? And there was no alternative. Well, that's the fertile soil that justice reform actually can grow on. It's the acknowledgement of what it would be like if we had those alternatives. What do we actually want for that intersectionality to look like, from our legislative directives to what we actually have? And I think the knowledge is part of the checks and balances in our democracy that's been really missing. And frankly, I blame, in a joking way all the time, it comes down to the mascot. I cannot stand the mascot of the Department of Justice. It's a blindfolded woman. I love the woman part, but a blindfolded woman who apparently holds out her arms. As long as she sees nothing, everything will balance out.
Right.
What
Justice
world is that?
Is blind.
Justice is blind.
Right.
No, it's actually not.
It's really not.
It's not. It never has been.
Yeah.
And we're not in a post-racial world. We do see color, and race and bias has infected and at times infused every aspect of our entire system. So why would our legal system be different?
You are so often confronted in reading this book with the way in which the justice system is so dependent on the whims of individuals,
Yes.
whether it's the judge or even the prosecutor or the defense attorney, all the police officers, all of these people who have a say in the system. And in one of the stories, you have a judge who is shopping online while a rape victim
Yes.
is telling her story.
A child rape victim.
Yeah. It's extraordinary. And do you have a sense, I mean, you're not going to solve all the problems in the legal system, but I mean, do you have a sense of how that can be more fair? Or are we just doomed to a system that is at the whims of people who might be, frankly, not good people?
Well, we are really at the whims for a variety of reasons. And that instance you talk about really speaks to the heart of, every chapter personifies issues in the national zeitgeist. And that is really about the Me Too era of, hey, we believe women. In a court of law, victim blaming and shaming is light years behind whatever progress we think that we have achieved so far. And it comes from, in some instances, women who are doing this as well.
Right. That, I think, is the other thing
It's shocking.
that is so interesting. I mean, you would think, oh, this would be a story about, a man and he doesn't care.
Right.
It was a female judge.
It was a judge, and it was somebody who was engaging in the kind of behavior based on preconceived notions that are frankly archaic that you would expect of somebody who has not had any vested interest, let alone consistent role within our system. And when you look at things like that, Abby, it really begs the question of, well, if we believe in a system of checks and balances in order to have a fair democratic process, to have these three co-equal branches of government, well, where are the checks and balances per se on something as so powerful as those involved in the criminal justice system? And you'd be surprised. I mean, I know in the headlines, and you cover them so eloquently, that we think that our entire nation is following the directives of the high profile cases. Like what happens when there's a huge magnifying glass must happen everywhere. But in reality, the overwhelming majority of cases are described, prosecuted, contemplated by the whims of individuals. So we have a patchwork going on and a lack of uniformity that often leads to, frankly, baptism by fire and your approach to it. And so I do think there needs to be additional balances on that, not because I didn't have wonderful colleagues. I had really some who were extraordinarily strong and I revere to this day. Others that I also write about who I think should be in no position to even have oversight over their average Girl Scout cookie meeting, let alone somebody's future. And this is as a Girl Scout troop cookie mom saying this, okay? And so I think there needs to be those checks. But I don't think that we should just resign ourselves to saying, because it's a patchwork, nothing can be solved.
Yeah.
We do this all the time in checks and balances. This should be one opportunity.
You talk about in the book seeing the defendant pool being overwhelmingly Black.
Yeah.
Yes. Here in the District of Columbia, I think it's less than 50% now of the city is Black. How do you reconcile what's going on there? I think colloquially we'll all say that's evidence of the system's bias against Black people, but explain to us how that happens.
I think some people want to be as reductive of saying, there must be white officers who are racial profiling and leading to this overwhelming disproportionality. No, many of my officers are also Black and brown.
Right.
It doesn't explain it, right? But yet the color blue is trumping the other colors, so to speak, in many respects. And I can tell you from my stance, I intellectually understood disparate impact and disproportionality. We learn about it in school. We can talk about it with such fluency intellectually. But then you see it in practice, and there is something that I can only describe as akin to being on a train platform, Abby. Like, the power of a train, its ferocity, its speed, those pistons are gonna go, and you're gonna find yourself realizing it's gonna be very speedy and quick. Then one day you're on a platform, and one bit whizzes by you, and you actually feel the reverberations of that train. It takes your breath away at what you see, the ferocity in practice. When you walk inside of a criminal courtroom, and you see the ferocity of that train of profiling, of the intersection of sociological factors, socioeconomic factors, the evolution of the 13th Amendment, the idea of what different plights are, even a stone's throw from the Capitol, it takes your breath away. And the system goes, it keeps going. The inertia of it. And so it's difficult to reconcile fully, but I think what you cannot do to reconcile it is be reductive enough to just believe that you can simply solve the problems by having people who are proponents of civil rights in the room where it happens, a seat at the table. It's what you do with that seat. It's what you wield while you're in it. You cannot be a mute. Your presence has to be more than just ceremonial. It has to be proactive.
But you also talk about the trade-offs.
Yeah.
There were times you walked into the courtroom, and in one story, you talk about you couldn't use all of your capital on one, case. That you knew that there was going to be another case where your advocacy for, frankly, fairness for a defendant might matter more. Right. Talk to us about that and how often you had to make those kinds of trade-offs and how often you felt like maybe you didn't make the right one?
It's such a powerful intuition for you to ask that question about how that really comes down to it, because there are so many analogies right now, Abby, where we talk about the ethics of choice, the idea of who is worthy of an opportunity, right, that you extend. And we know that old adage our mothers and fathers have taught us about choose your battles carefully. That's a decision I didn't think I'd have to make as often as I did as a prosecutor. But there is an element of capital and credibility that even though you are fungible as the individual prosecutor, the judges, particularly in a place like Washington, D.C., which is a hybrid, unlike other federal offices, you have repeat players. And so it's very customary that you're before the same judge multiple times a week, let alone month, let alone over the course of your career, defense counsel the same. And so what you are saying and the arguments you make are going to carry the weight. And it's the difference between using and exhausting your advocacy for what might be a fool's errand, or might be an exercise of futility because somebody else has already persuaded a judge, to cultivating the moment of thinking, here is the perfect moment where when I have the right emphasis and art of persuasion, that it will make the most difference. And there were moments I had to reserve that, knowing that this woman who would stand up and say, Laura Coates, on behalf of the people of the United States, that at times it necessarily included the defendant. And it were those moments when I oftentimes would have to preserve that capital to demonstrate that the line was blurred between who required that champion that day. And I think I used it strategically, but always fairly, I hope. But to be honest, Abby, and one thing I write about in the book, there are moments that induce insomnia because I'm not always sure about the decisions I have made. I am a fallible human. I don't pretend to be any different. And I'm still on a journey, as we all are. And there are moments I wonder, did I have more in the reserves? Did I think that every cartridge was spent when I had the ammunition still? And other times, did I exhaust it and compromise another moment? And these are when you are in a system comprised of human beings, the absence of humanity can haunt you.
Yeah. There isn't a single choice that was made in this book, and I'm sure in your entire career that was super easy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
I do.
difficult. This is hard stuff, and what this book does is it forces those who read it to be confronted with the fact that that multiple things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
That there can be unfairness in the system, and yet people who still need to be prosecuted.
Yes.
You talk about the government not being a attorney for the victim, but also being an attorney in a lot of ways for society to
Yes.
prevent crimes from happening again. And I do, we are in a moment now as a country where we're talking a lot about crime. We're talking a lot about the role that prosecutors play in crime. And putting this book into that context, I wonder what you think about that debate, about whether, whether prosecutors really do have a role in increasing or decreasing crime. I mean, is that an overblown description of their role in this system when you have some prosecutors who ran on and say, we need the system to be more fair? Is it fair, you think, to blame some of those policies for crime?
You know, I think people don't, I think they routinely underestimate even the power of prosecutors, even knowing how powerful they are. There, of course, are limits, which is one of the frustrations of that power, because we are dependent on the cases that come. The deck is handed to you. Mm-hmm. How you play your hand is going to be dependent on the individual prosecutor. But when you have the so-called progressive prosecutors, and I say so-called because I'm not entirely sure that people are distinguishing between the political notion of progressive and those that are progressive enough to understand the limited resources and how you have to appropriate them and allocate them. So the term, I think, is conflated. But I think that prosecutors have an extraordinary amount of discretion that they wield. I mean, just think about this. I write in the chapter of the book about how there was a tension between myself and a Black defense counsel who approached me in a restaurant when I was not too far from here, frankly. And mind you, I was minding my own business. I was having my escapism moment. I was enjoying my own cookie. And she approached me because she couldn't reconcile that I could have the audacity to say I'm a proponent of civil rights and be a prosecutor.
Right.
It was either you're a prosecutor or a proponent of civil rights, which should tell you a great deal about the mistrust in the system. And, but it acknowledges she and I both thought we had the right seats at the right table. Mm-hmm. Her as defense counsel, me as a prosecutor. Now, I value the role of defense counsel. They are extraordinary, they are critical, and they should continue in their valiant efforts to secure fairness. But they only begin when every decision a prosecutor has made has already been made. Mm-hmm. They are at the mercy of being on the other side of United States versus. They're at the mercy of the decisions to charge or not to charge, of grand juries who are going to be, frankly, very susceptible to the whims of a prosecutor. And of course, they are hoping that a prosecutor will provide exculpatory evidence, that the prosecutor will have healthy skepticism towards the officers who are routinely reciting a Supreme Court precedent script about how to justify their use of force. And so all of those notions, if we don't have people who are going to responsibly wield that power, then obviously abuse will run rampant. But if you have people in those positions who understand, don't covet that power, but will harness it appropriately, then I think we can make an even bigger difference as prosecutors. And I also think the alternative courts, the idea of drug treatment courts, the idea of mental health being something that is treated separately from the normal retribution-based and punitive aspects of incarceration, prosecutors have the ability to ask for and seek these things. And so I think we should rely on them even more, with the caveat, of course, that that comes with the glass half full approach, that there'll be people who are proponents of civil rights who are in those positions of power.
Do you think that the culture within your office as a prosecutor influenced how you were able to wield your power? I think to that story of the colleague of yours who took you into an interrogation.
Yes.
And it seemed honestly to be a toxic culture wherever he came from. And I wondered, I mean, how did that impact how you were able to do the kind of work that you wanted to do?
You know, the culture in the particular office, I would say, is no more or less toxic than any other workplace in the United States of America that is comprised of people who are eager to be the center of power. And we're in Washington, D.C., where, frankly, you throw a stone and you will knock down 30 ambitious people hoping to wield that power. I don't advocate violence, of course. You don't throw any stones. But we all live in glass houses in a place like Washington, D.C. Right. And so what you will find is, and what I certainly found, was this notion of the us versus thems. The idea of trying to understand where you fit in the spectrum of how one wields power. And I think we all think the best of ourselves, that perhaps we're wielding it responsibly, but sometimes just being in the room where it happens, literally, it's hard to distinguish yourself from the person because that fungibility we spoke of. And it's hard to, on some hands, distinguish yourself from the toxic if you bear the stench of colleagues, right? There are obviously moments where even for my greatest intentions, there was the collective memory of a community of how other prosecutors treated the us's versus thems. There are police officers to this day who are approaching community members and they bear the stigma and burdens of colleagues who are the so-called bad apples of, frankly, poisoned trees in general. And so I think in a way, none of us escape unharmed from the toxicity of things, politics included of all this. But I do think we have to try with all of our might to pursue fairness in spite of it. And to me, the most toxic notion would be to pretend that the legal system is not as it is, that somehow the civil rights era is complete and somehow justice will simply prevail when we don't see what's in front of us.
Yeah. The book is also about you as a person and as a woman, and bringing your whole self to the job, because there were so many times when you can't hide who you are. You couldn't hide when you were pregnant. You couldn't hide being a Black woman who looked exactly like a victim in one of the cases you're trying. You couldn't help a lot of things about who you were being a part of that process. How difficult is it to be a woman in these kinds of roles?
You know, I wrote this book from the perspective, and there are so many stories to share, but I really focused on primarily the times that I was pregnant with my children. Yeah. And for what I was figuratively carrying while I was literally carrying my children. And I was sort of sitting there, visibly pregnant. I was not like you, cute as a button when I was pregnant, where everyone's like, is she pregnant? Is she not at the time? I was that woman who you were like, are you like 25 months pregnant? Is that what's happening right now? And I'd go, no, actually I'm 2 months, but thank you very much for asking. And so I was very, visibly sort of the essence of femininity, right? I was a mother. I would have trials where my baby would be kicking or moving literally through my shirt, and the jurors would be like, oh, in these moments. Defense counsel would be upset because I would be, I had a case once when a woman pointed out and said, well, I asked her, well, how were you visibly showing when you were attacked? I was about your size, right. And objection, Your Honor, coming from everywhere. It's like she's trying to pretend to be pregnant. I'm like, actually, I'm not. But so there were moments of just those of being pregnant where it changed me. I think, like everyone, I endeavor to compartmentalize, but there were moments, Abby, where once I became a mother, that was nearly impossible. Right. Excuse me. It was no longer possible for me to not see someone's child in every room I was in. It was nearly impossible for me to not be emotional. I mean, I was at times in the grand jury lactating through my shirt. I would be going for a second to the hallway to vomit, to come back to do another eyewitness. Once I was in a courtroom and I took a quick break to hear my OBGYN, who was not my normal OBGYN, tell me that if you have a quick second, I want you to know there was some abnormality in the testing, and don't worry, you're still within the window to abort your fetus. While I'm prosecuting a child abuse case in these moments, right? And so there are moments when you are dealing with whatever is happening in your life, but there is really the harder challenge has always been being a Black woman, which I embrace and I love. Yeah. But I oftentimes think about this essence of Black girl magic, this notion of a stereotype that people wouldn't necessarily realize does not inure to our benefit, and that is of strength. Black women are known to be extraordinarily strong and to suffer no fools. But it does not mean that we don't suffer. It does not mean that we're not vulnerable. It doesn't mean that we don't feel deeply and sometimes want to run for cover and hope someone will be there to catch us when we fall, even though we intend to get back up in a moment. And so I think a lot of the expectations of what strength brings can lead to some pretty absurd results and mistreatment towards us. And that was difficult in moments where the assumption would be this confluence of, well, she takes no mess, she's a Black woman, and combine that with the prosecutor, so the law is the law, I don't care about your sob story, did you break the law or not? Well, great, put your handcuffs on and walk away. But I didn't stand at that intersection of a robotic approach to life. I don't know if we've ever been able to, Abby, I know I can't.
I mean, I think it's so, this is the story of, working women who are carrying everything. I mean, you're carrying your children, but it's actually the emotional weight of it all that if you're a working woman, especially if you're a Black woman doing any job, you know what that's like. And you write about it so seamlessly throughout the book that's what makes it so relatable, is the way in which at every moment it's inescapable. That you're carrying those psychological burdens along with the task of doing a really difficult job and needing to seem really stoic about it. And talk about how you balanced emotion. I mean, so many women, especially I think maybe in the generation before us, you didn't talk about motherhood. You didn't cry. You didn't show emotion at work. You didn't want people around you to think that you were compromised because you were a mother. And I'm sure that sense was probably a little heightened in the work that you did and do. How did you think about that and what you were willing to show and what you weren't, what you were willing to be vulnerable about and what you weren't?
Well, it's funny because even and I'm looking at you knowing that you can relate to everything that I'm describing, although we have different, career paths. This is something that resonates with all of us, all women generally in this issue. But there'd be moments, speaking of not wanting to show, as I mentioned, I was so visibly pregnant and I wouldn't acknowledge I was pregnant. I would be in the courtroom and a defendant would say, oh, I'd hold the door over me. What do you do? And I'd be like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I wouldn't even acknowledge what was so obvious. And
the judge says, you can sit down,
you can sit
Laura.
down.
And you're like, no,
what do
I
you
will
mean?
not sit down.
I will not sit down. My ankles are swollen to the size of like my thigh. And I'm thinking, no, I'm good. It's perfect. I'm fine. But there is always going to be this notion that somehow we mistakenly believe that emotion is our Achilles heel. That if your voice cracks, that if your eyes flood with tears, that if you are somehow emotional or expressive, that will be used against you. I had to let that go a long time ago, though, in my life. I mean, I happen to be someone who, I have this saying I always do. I wear my own jersey. I am my own champion. If anyone else champions for me too, that's the added cherry on the top.
Okay.
But I expect when I walk into a room that I'm going to have to teach people how to treat me. I just expect it over the course of my life. Not because I have a chip on my shoulder, because I see the world and think you're going to come with whatever preconceived notions. You may or may not assume that I have every right to be next to you. So I'm just going to approach it with knowing that I will be my champion in this moment and you'll do with it as you will. I've had so many moments when I have, made some comment as cool as a cucumber and somebody will inevitably do the, okay, moment.
Right.
And you're like, this was 1990 call.
Right.
They'd like you to go a
that's
long
not
time
me.
ago. It's not you.
That's that other black
right.
lady.
But you know what?
met.
But if it was me,
Right.
then you know what? That's fine. Whatever you want to think about that, you can think about that. So I've had moments when I've had to sort of balance this of even caring what other people think and caring more about what I think about the issue, right? And it's not always something I can easily do. I mean, I'm human. So there are moments when the toxicity can come in and self-doubt or imposter syndrome can attempt to knock on my door. And that's when I put my jersey back on. And I actually literally have a Coats jersey. It's fabulous. And I'll put it on, and my kids will go, oh, mommy got a jersey on. Who messed with you? Someone's going to get it. And I'm like, well, mommy has her jersey on just in preparation of the world today. So that's how I try to balance it. But sometimes it's a reminder. It's a reminder that make yourself proud, right? My father said something to me. It's a dedication in my book. And I dedicate it to my own children because at one of my very low moments, and I'm the youngest of 3 girls, I'm very much the baby of the family. My parents are like, please stop calling us every day, 20 times a day. Oh, they love me anyway. And my father, at a very low moment in my life, he always had a knack of reaching out and knowing when I needed him. And he said, Laura, I want you to know, if you are never more than you are right now, for me, you will always have been more than enough. And I carry that with me because I know that my family knows me best. I know that they have seen me in my flaws, in my strengths, in my trials and tribulations. And so for me, I just define it as I will feel successful as long as my moral compass is pointing me in the direction that my feet are going. And if I'm never more than I am right now, I'll be disappointed. But if I'm never more than I am today in terms of following my convictions, I've done enough.
I think if you are never more than you are today, you would have done quite a lot.
Well,
and
look
I think
who's
your
talking.
dad.
Look
I think
who's
your dad is
talking.
100% right. I remember staying on that little cameo that your dad had in the book and thinking to myself, that's dad.
That's dad.
That's a dad. My dad would have said the same thing, and in those really tough moments when you were just human, those are in the book too. I wonder if you ever felt, to what you were just saying, that that people expected you to be compromised because you were a Black woman.
Yeah.
Either a woman at certain points, maybe it's just because you were a woman, people thought, oh, she can't be fair in this situation, or because you were Black, people thought, oh, she can't be fair. Did you ever feel that way?
I have that now at times, even in the commentary I do.
Oh yeah, well, as I know,
right,
we experience this every day.
The idea of objectivity is not always welcome.
Yeah.
That's, people, when they presume you have an agenda, your objective analysis can be a dagger that someone wants to hold to your throat. So I know that quite well in the business we're in. But honestly, one of the things that prepared me for that notion of people pigeonholing you or this unending quest to figure you out, right? How often have you had someone talk to you, they're asking you almost like an interview when you meet them. They're just they're studying your face, they're looking around your body, they're looking at things and saying, where are you from? Where are your people from? Now, what school did you go now? Hold on, are you in this? Oh, hold on, do I know what? They're just trying to have this list because if they can whittle down in this flow chart, if she says yes, then she's this. If she says no, then she's this. And then, here is the pigeonhole, and then I think I can deal with you. And I'm very disruptive of that. The flow charts people try to navigate are nearly impossible. But I'm also very prepared for that over the course of my life. I mean, I'm a Black woman from Minnesota. Do you think I have not had experience where people have questioned my Blackness and if she's Black enough in different moments as a way of being compromised, that I don't get certain things? I mean, I grew up in a time when before people were looking at my home state of Minnesota for frankly all the reasons they're doing now and thinking, oh, it's just Prince I thought was there. They had Black people there, right?
People forget there are Black people in the Midwest.
Right? Are you serious? And I sort of chuckled, and so I was always in those moments of people believing that somehow there was but one Black experience in America. And that as much as we fought against the idea of being considered a monolith, somehow it was only acceptable if you fit into that monolith. So you had to go to a certain school, or be raised a certain way, or go to a certain church, or a certain religion, or think a certain thing, and only then were you thought to not be compromised in some way. But for me, I grew up feeling a kindred spirit and with the Ruby Bridges of the world. I mean, I knew her stories more than I knew Dr. Seuss. I mean, I'm the daughter of a woman from Fayetteville, North Carolina, who moved to the north when her mom and her father became domestic workers, the chauffeur for companies that I represented as a lawyer. My father, a foster child in Worcester, Massachusetts, a Black boy in 1950s America. And here I was, but one of a few in a predominantly white area in Minnesota, feeling a kinship to those who had to integrate these environments and wondering why people thought that I had the audacity to feel just as much of a Black experience as anyone else. Mm-hmm. So by the time I became a prosecutor, Abby, and people would question this notion of whose side was I on and was I compromised, in some respects I was prepared, and in others I was woefully disappointed that I was still confronting this evergreen notion of having to prove one's allegiance by your perceptions of who I ought to be. So in many ways, it's funny, my mother always says, no matter what you do, you look back at your life and you realize all of the moments that the universe was preparing you and foreshadowing what was to come. And I certainly think that's true and write about it in the book at all the different moments, those blink moments, those moments of, this is what this is. And have you been here before? And that sort of useful deja vu. Yeah. And that's part of what the book is about.
Interestingly, your career took you from the civil rights division to the prosecutor's office. Yeah. And I think, and you you sort of describe it as sort of almost like going into a situation where people were like, you can't make a difference here. But I actually think, interestingly, now, as we're looking at the voting rights situation, it's probably, I think some people might argue that things are kind of destitute in that area as well. So both of these experiences, you're kind of, in both places, you were kind of in roles where you could see the best of what the law could do. And now I think we're all maybe seeing what happens when the law fails.
Yeah. Or really how fragile our perceptions of paper is. I mean, we know from the last 5 to 6 years, one of the things the Trump administration, I think, pointed out was the fragility of our democracy in the sense that we all thought that in those figurative break glass in case of emergency, when you broke it, something came out. Something was there to put out a fire, to deal with whatever issue. We realize time and time again, our democracy has really been based on a series of gentlemen's handshakes and ladies' agreements.
Sometimes it's not even paper.
Sometimes not even paper.
Sometimes it's just
an wink and a nod, right? Or I felt you, I understood this moment. Yeah. And so, you think about just how fragile that is, and maybe I was so naive to think that fragility wouldn't extend to other areas. That because, look, we have a nation of laws, it's codified. Wait, it's there. Then again, I have a congressional subpoena. What do you mean you're not going to do anything about that? Huh? What are you saying? I have a congressional subpoena here. Or how about the ideas of people even going back in the 60s and 50s? I've got an order to integrate this school. Oh, that's cute. What else do you got in those notions? And so, that's why one of my big pet peeves, I often say, I hate the phrase civil rights era. Like, we have eras where the dinosaurs roamed the earth. We have eras when we probably had Neanderthals and cavemen, and we can quibble with when those are. But the civil rights is not an era. It's not finite. It has not been complete. It's supposed to be a concept, a constant part of the fabric of our country. And the more we suggest and think, well, that's done, that's taken care of because it's written down, we must have something. We've got a justice department. We've got a whole department for it. We must have justice. It's written down. Yeah. It's on the side of a wall. We can't lull ourselves into that. I mean, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We look more like 1964, and then part of the reason is because we have a Supreme Court who also doesn't value the precedent of things. That it's some justices, it's a piece of paper. So you see thematically through all this, the connective tissue here, Abby, is always, why do we continuously step on the same rake by thinking, as long as it's written down, change has come? It's those who actually hold the feet to the fire, I think have the optimism to know that that's required in progress as well. And getting to that point where, that aspirational arc is actually achieved. And selfishly, you and I are moms. Selfishly, with every case I talk about, with every moment, I am realizing and thinking about my children and wanting them not to have these conversations. I have a conversation with you right now that I'm sure our great-grandmothers could relate to. Mm-hmm. That's a sadness for me. I want my children to one day say, God, is that what you guys were doing? Oh, okay, Mom. Well, that's crazy. Yeah. And that's done now. And I may be a fool. Some have said, well, how could you possibly expect that to happen in your kid's lifetime? And I say, well, 2 years ago, I saw everyone's teeth and nose and mouth in every building because we didn't have masks. 2 years ago, there were 1 million more people alive. 2 years ago, there wasn't this toxic COVID-19. So if that can infect the globe, then maybe something for good can also infect in a good way. Yeah. And I hope that comes.
It does seem, though, that the criminal justice system remains very resistant to progress, which you saw firsthand, to real fairness. I mean, sometimes the law and justice were in conflict, fairness and justice were in conflict at the same time. And I think I have a hard time now, just given how political it all is, seeing how real progress can be made. Yeah. How do you feel optimistic about that?
I do, but I also acknowledge that the House is meant to win, right? In the grand gambling world, it's supposed to win. The deck is stacked. And there is no coincidence that should be thought of that somehow someone's right to vote is tied towards the criminal justice system. I mean, this is intentional. Ava DuVernay's documentary on the 13th is unbelievable to point this out.
It's incredible, yeah.
I mean, the pig laws that are happening in different places, the 3 strikes and you're out, the ways in which people are able to be, constrained in their ability to participate and make decisions and seek representation. That's not accidental. Yeah. And so I think that people have to realize this is not a coincidence, and that if we really believe in a balanced system and a government of, for, and by the people, then we can't allow the convenience of tyrannical rule through an unfair system that says it's about justice. Some of the nation's laws are bad laws, Abby. They just are. But guess what? They always tell me they can walk and chew gum at the same time in Congress. So how about we read and legislate, and also the chewing gum part can be the idea of thinking about what laws are no longer in the furtherance of justice and what you can do about those. Maybe you can modernize certain aspects. The Violence Against Women Act, for one rake, was attempting to do so until the NRA put its thumb on the scale for the so-called boyfriend loophole. It took years to be able to even attempt to modernize it. But there are endeavors to try in other areas. should be ways from voting rights to even this notion of a presumption of innocence. Why are we paying for it? Do we really think that the money people are putting towards being able to go out prior to the trial is not filling a pothole? What is it supposed to be doing, and what is it for? And so I do think, I mean, I'm a prosecutor who believes in redemption of the person and of the system. And I think we can get there. Yeah. Why? Because what is the alternative? That we just resign ourselves to this is the way it always will be, knowing that fairness is not, I mean, the title of the book is quite intentional. I was pursuing fairness because justice can be quite elusive. But fairness, that ought to be achievable.
What's interesting, though, is that I think punishing people is so seductive to folks. There's a story in the book of a woman who was a victim, and she wanted the court to know that she did not want her the person who victimized her to be punished in the way that he would have been punished, had the law been able to just do what it said on paper. And it was notable because it's probably rare. I mean, would you say that it's rare? Yeah. That a victim would feel that way? Because I think a lot of victims want punishment. And we as a society, as an American society, we view punishment as justice. Yes. And it seems hard to turn that on its head, which is effectively what fairness is asking, is to say sometimes maybe less punishment. And that's not as satisfying to a lot of people.
I think the phrasing you use of punishment being seductive is spot on. But the reason it was not seductive to her, and I hope to many others, is because if you're searching for accountability and rehabilitation and a sense that you have been fulfilled by something, punishment rarely gets you that. And I'm not suggesting that I did not seek sentences with an eye towards just punitive behavior, punishment. Because that's part of our system as well.
I mean, talk about that. Sometimes punishment is warranted.
Yes, it is. You know, I don't think, in the cases I prosecuted, that you said earlier, two things can be true. I can believe the system is flawed and believe that I prosecuted guilty people.
Right.
Yeah. Due process is what's required, not that I turn a blind eye because I don't want to perpetuate a system that's been unfair. But infusing fairness is the requirement. But I think in this victim's case, it was called I Want No Part of It, what was more seductive to her was being able to be there to say, I will have no part in you asking me to pretend like this criminal justice system is going to do more for this boy than a second chance would. And in a world where we offer second chances out like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory of candy to not Black and brown people, the idea of what does it say about a society that it's seductive for it to happen to, it's only gratifying if the book is thrown at those who are Black and brown. And so I hope people understand, and this is an issue that came up just the other day, in the sentencing of Kim Potter, the officer who killed Daunte Wright. You had a judge who was crying on the stand because she was grappling with the notion of what did the punishment fit the crime? Yeah. And a second chance essentially was doled out in the form of 2 years, right? And this idea of what would this help? Who would it serve in the end? The sort of what's done is done. That only strategically happens for certain types of victims. There's some notion of who is entitled to be treated with the dignity of a victim and who is retribution sought for, right? And we also remember with the shooting, the mass shooting in South Carolina, people were shocked to think that the victims would say, I forgive, because it was so antithetical to the idea of punishment. But in reality, and Dylann Roof aside, in reality, the justice system, the penal system, the prison system is ill-equipped to rehabilitate if we only think about punishment. Right. Because the overwhelming number of people come back as returning citizens in this country. So what are they going to do when they get back?
Yeah.
And what's the expectation to guard against recidivism, to not have this stigma of being a felon, to have all those different notions.
Yeah.
We have to make it less. I'm not saying that victims should not seek punishment, but I think if you're going to speak that kind of truth to power, you ought to know what the truth is about what ultimately will happen in that system.
Many people believe that rehabilitation doesn't work, but that's
Yeah.
partly because we don't actually rehabilitate people in this country. We don't actually do it in any large enough scale to understand if it can work and under what circumstances. I also think that what you're describing is the complicatedness of it all. You have people who will say, if you care about dismantling the carceral system in this country, should you incarcerate, even when you think that that would have been done for a Black or a brown defendant? These are tough questions,
They are.
right? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. But I think the book really forces you to start thinking about those things, thinking about how complex those choices are. Sometimes those choices are yours as a prosecutor, sometimes they're the judges, sometimes they're the juries. But it's complicated, it's not easy.
Sometimes it's the absence of choice that complicates things. Sometimes the answer is right in front of you, but the choice is not. And that speaks volumes about where I think we really need to be. I do think that there needs to be an overall evaluation. I don't mean like a pseudo commission that's job is to esoterically approach the issues. I think it's about understanding that in a world where we value agency, for most everyone except women who are making choices about their body, but everyone else in terms of agency, then, you know, why is it so constricted? If the reason you're doing so is because it's a check and balance on the risk of abuse of power, I understand. If it's an absence of choice because nobody has thought beyond punishment in the system, that's an illusory choice in an illusory system of justice.
Absolutely. Well, Laura, this is an incredible book, but it's really, it's a book about you as an extraordinary person, a mother, a brilliant mind, a brilliant attorney. You really see that in the pages.
Thank you.
Okay,
oh,
and
so
no, I mean, look, this woman is prepared. Okay, Laura Coates will be prepared in that courtroom, and you can see it in there. And it's an extraordinary read. It is gripping in so many different ways. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for chatting with me.
I'm so glad I got to. Thank you.
And you know, as a fellow working mom, I so appreciate you having gone through the fire before me to show me that it can be done. It can be done. We can raise these babies and be in the courtroom and be on television all at the same time. Laura, love you so much. Love the book.
Thank you.
Everyone at home, I hope that you will go online, find Laura's book, Just Pursuit, pick up your copy. Thank you to Mahogany for hosting this event. Buy this book from Mahogany, and you can find some more information about where to find the book on the social media for this event. We'll put it out there so you can just click on it and go buy it. And while you're at it, support your local libraries.
Yes.
We are so appreciative of the DC Public Library System for hosting us here tonight. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a great night and a great rest of your evening.